Konnichiwa, Shane.
Hi, Shane.
San.
Hi, Mark at the end.
Konnichiwa. And
Hello. Yes, Gagali will join a bit later. He has another meeting currently.
Great, great.
Maybe, Jimmy, I'll just show the antitrust policy notice and get that out of the way.
Absolutely. I think that's a great idea.
Okay. At the beginning of our meetings, we show this antitrust policy notice. You can find the full antitrust policy on our website. And if you have any questions, you can email me or contact our counsel, Andy Updegrove. This telco meeting is chaired by Jimmy, and it will be covering a series of topics he raised by email a day or two ago. I'm going to hand over to Jimmy now and let him run the show.
Thank you. On another note, if you could send me that that slide that you just showed, then I can use that for this afternoon's meeting, and you don't have to stay up extremely late just to make one slide.
Absolutely. I will be emailing that to you with great pleasure.
Great, thanks. So with that out of the way, let me share my screen. I have prepared a little agenda slide. Essentially, it's mirroring what we what I sent out beforehand.
Okay.
But it's still good to have it on the screen, I think. So first of all, welcome back to the Telco Group meetings. Now we aim to run them a little more regularly in 2022. So we aim to have them the first Thursday of each month, and one sort of morning session and one afternoon session, if you are the EU time zones, so that we cater for both our US friends and for our Asian friends. I think most of Asia are probably on vacation, or parts of Asia are at least, so I don't expect that we'll see very of those our friends in this meeting, but that's the good thing about having regularly occurring. We'll meet them soon again instead. So I figured that we had the group last year, and the email list and the group has served as a good way of changing experiences and sharing the group's wisdom. But as I wrote in the email, we're telecom people, so standardization is sort of in our DNA. So the very concrete work at looking at what can we do in the areas of SBOMs, as things are shaping up, it's that 2020 will be the year of the SBOM, if you will, if 2020 wasn't already. So the idea being that we'll look further into what can we do in the areas of SBOMs, and we had some suggestions already in our meeting series of last year, where we had some consensus on some issues, and other things we probably need more discussions on to be able to land in where the group is leaning towards. But I think first of all, we could do a quick round the table, just so everyone is familiar with each other. There's not very many of us on the call right now, so I think that will be a fairly quick exercise. Myself, Jim Malberg, I work at the OSPO of Ericsson. I have a background as a lawyer, but I spent most of my career trying to do that profession. So that's shortly about myself. I'm also on the board of OpenChain, serving as one of Ericsson's board members. It's my great pleasure to do so. With that, I could hand off to the next person on my list here, participants, which is Shane. I think Shane probably needs no further introduction, but still.
So my name is Shane Cochlin. I'm the general manager of the OpenChain project. I'm one of the Linux Foundation staff, but I'm very much focused on OpenChain. I've got a background in basically intellectual property and open source stretching back around 20 years. Based in Japan, so you'll find me in your morning times, but not your evenings, but I'm always delighted to talk by email.
Great, and then I hand off to Jari.
Hey, good morning, konnichiwa, good morning. So I'm Jari, and I'm Finnish but based in Switzerland, and I've been doing open source mainly from the M&A point of view for quite a long time at Cisco, and currently I'm offering my service as a freelance, and yeah, I'm based in Switzerland, so more or less like normally in these let's say normal hour meetings for CET time zone, I'll be joining these calls. And actually I have background in Nokia, so I thought that okay, maybe I need to be part of the telco group as well, because I think 12, 13, 14, something like that years at Nokia. So I have fairly long background in telco world as well. And next, who's on your list, Jimmy?
Excellent. Next on my list is Mark Etienne.
Yes, hello, good morning, everyone. So yes, I'm from Nokia. Previously, I was at Alcatel-Lucent, which was bought by Nokia. Currently, I'm in the open source initiative group of Nokia, which is our OSPO, which is run by Jone Saarinen. And I'm contributing to this telco group with my colleague Gergely Chetari, who will join a bit later. So I'm not at all a lawyer. I'm more an open source contributor. And I have worked on the SPDX standard. I've done some contributions since release 1.1. Okay, that's all.
Thank you, Mark Etienne. So I can hand over to Håkan. I'm sorry, who has joined the meeting.
Yes, my name is Håkan Asberg. I'm with Ericsson Open Source Office, or the Ericsson OSPO, so a colleague of Jimmy then. And my background is I was a developer back in the days, long time ago, and I've spent the last 20 years now with compliance of open source in Ericsson. Yep.
Thank you, Håkan. Then last but not least on my list is JTH.
Hi, my name is Jan. Actually, I just received the appointment, and it looks like that I'm not right here, because it's looking like your guys are doing mainly telco focused SBOM activity. I can give you probably some background on SBOMs, but not specifically on telco. So, but you will be familiar with that. So I guess it's better for me to drop off again.
You are more than welcome to stay if you want. I think the telco group is open and welcoming to all, even if sort of our sort of common factor is that we're sort of active in the telco industry. But of course, we do not exclude anyone. So you're more than welcome to stay if you see the agenda looks interesting. With that out of the way, now we know who's on the call and who's who. I think we can move on in the agenda to next point, which is agree on some cornerstone principles for our work on the telco standard SBOM going forward. I have some proposals up on screen and also some same sent out in the email previously. So with addition to that, I just like to clarify that since we'll run the same meeting in the afternoon, for other time zones, we'll not make any sort of formal decisions or reach consensus now. I think we'll try to merge the views of the two meetings together to ensure that everyone had their say. If there's consensus, that's great. If we don't have consensus, we'll try to flag that over email. I guess will be the preferred method. And if we cannot resolve over email, we'll look into the option of having an ad hoc meeting in case we sort of need to have actual verbal discussions between groups to be able to reach consensus on one point or others. But hopefully it should be uncontentious, so we'll be able to reach consensus on that at least. So my suggestions for sort of our cornerstone principles would be that what we do here in the area of telco standard SBOM is we're not aiming to change the OpenChain specification, and we're not aiming to fork it. Further, if one is to implement the telco standard for SBOMs, you don't need to be OpenChain conformant. It's of course great if you are, but I think that if one wants to get as broad spread of it as possible, it's probably good to ensure that these things can operate independently of each other. They sort of both have independent value, and that's whatever solution we come up with here, sort of in its entirety, of course, needs to be adhere to US federal requirements on SBOMs that will come into effect this year. And they have. So I think those are sort of the founding principles, if you will, or the cornerstones that we could build this on. I'm welcoming the group to see if anyone has any other views on sort of what else should we put down, if anything, should we put down as a cornerstone of this group? Or for that matter, if someone doesn't agree with what I have put up, that's also welcome feedback.
Yes, so my question was, why do we need specifically a telco standard, and what is specific to telco SBOM?
That's a great. That's actually a great question. And let me address that and address some of the questions that we had last year on that. And what we're aiming for is not really to sort of change SPDX or change Cyclone DX or any such thing. Looking to address a fairly small field or a small gap that currently exists, and drawing from like our own experiences within Ericsson, experiences shared by the group previously, is that even if we specify that we should receive our SBOMs in SPDX data format, it should contain this and this, and we should receive it at such and such time. We still receive things sort of in the wrong format. We receive things in the wrong file formats. So one example would be that we receive perhaps things in SPDX as specified, but we do receive it as sort of a scanned PDF that's not machine readable. Or we receive a machine readable, but we don't receive a human readable corresponding piece. And also that's one piece to sort of simplify our own lives, that we receive one thing that we're all sort of happy with. But it's also so that unless we sort of steer this thing up early enough in the process, I think that the real risk is that everyone will end up with their own custom requirements on these things that goes beyond what just SPDX specifies, what's specified elsewhere. So that would mean that for people far up value chain, that will be a burden in satisfying a number of different areas. For the people sort of further down, it would mean that either they specify that we want it in this format and they need to enforce that, or they will receive a multitude of different formats because everyone will be sort of working towards their own standards. So harmonizing this seems like like the responsible move for the industry. For those of us that are large vendors of equipment that has suppliers, it's sort of one thing we can do to take responsibility in the ecosystem to ensure that this doesn't become a burden for the ecosystem. And it's also good for us if we sort of can come to an understanding with sort of our downstream customers that this would be beneficial, and for our downstream customers to be able to compare what they receive from one vendor with what they get from another vendor. So those are sort of the objectives we're thinking of why we would actually need a standard for SBOMs, or perhaps it's more of a standard for SBOM management, or how we do things around SBOMs. I don't know, does that address your question, Mark, at the end?
Yes, well, yes, it's good to have a common understanding, but my question was more what specificities are for telco. I know there is an automotive group, for instance. So do we have the same requirements as other parts of industry, or do we have really specific things that are linked to our telco business?
I think that's a great question, and something that was broached upon last year. And I invited all participants then to reach out if they could come up with something that feels that this is specific to telco. This is not addressed in any of the sort of standard formats, and these are sort of telco specific things. If it turns out that our industry isn't unique in that regard, that we don't really have any special requirements, then of course what we create here would be reusable by others. But this is like the right forum to do it in. So perhaps we don't have any of those special requirements. For me, I can't really think of any, but that might be my lack of experience from other industries. I don't have a good frame of reference to compare it. Would you have anything in mind, Mark, at the end, or should we leave that one open and say that if we do come up with something, we can always add that on later?
No, I don't have no, my concern was that for the moment, I don't see something really specific to telco. So yes, my question was, do we have some specificities we want to handle?
One thought I think we had earlier last year was that basically, because the telco, the downstream customer is never, let's say, the end user customer, because it goes to the service providers. And for example, then the automotive, the downstream customer is the driver, basically, more or less. So I think there was some discussion that, okay, because of this, let's say, specialty for the telco and networking industry in general, is that the customer is the service provider, and they might have different requirements based on that position they are, instead of the, let's say, the end user, like the driver of the car.
Okay, so that's a good point.
So Jimmy, do you remember this discussion?
I remember it now that you mention it, and I think that was very clearly summarized. I think that's also a great distinction, just in terms of how our ecosystem works, and sort of who are actually the customers and who are developing things, and sort of how the supply chain works is different between the industries. So I would say that that's probably one thing that drives sort of telco specific needs, or may drive telco specific needs. Perhaps we end up exactly where all other industries are in the end anyhow, but it's certainly one thing that could drive the industry in a certain direction. So with that, I'd really like to raise the question of sort of, and perhaps we can get this out of the way quickly, but do you guys think we need sort of a formal terms of reference style document for the work here and for this group, or should we just run things sort of ad hoc and you know, if we ever need such a document, we can create it then? In my mind, it doesn't need to be very complicated. It could be as simple as, you know, we document 3 points we have above, and we document what the goal of this specific work is, and then we can, and just our meeting cadence we can document in that. Other than that, I don't think we need more specificity to it, but perhaps others will disagree or will see that there's a value in it, and in that case, I'm happy to at least take the pen and do a first drafting of it. And as is tradition in the OpenChain text, if everyone is silent, I will assume everyone agrees with me. So everyone agrees that we are fine to run things a little bit ad hoc, and that also gives us flexibility to change things as needed. So unless I hear differently in the meeting this afternoon, I'll cross off that we're happy to proceed without a formal terms of reference style document for this. That should probably also be mentioned that last year I think we agreed to use the CC Bayou for whatever work output this group has to make it as widely available as possible. Then
so Jimmy, I think there was Jimmy, like there was some discussion last year about the license, but did we get agreement that? Because now I can't remember.
I never heard back on. I cannot for the life of me, and I have to go back to my notes, look at the gentleman who raised the point that CC Bayou might not be preferable in his company's view.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, we never heard back on that point that it wouldn't be, and that was the ask from us, that if this is not okay, reach out and we'll come up with another proposal. But there was some discussion on it. You're absolutely right on that.
So maybe I think it might have been the
conclusion
kind of
was anyhow that there seems to be a broad consensus on that we should use.
Yeah. Correct. But yeah, there was some discussion definitely last year, I remember, about the license.
Yeah. And I think that if those concerns are raised again, then we can absolutely revisit that point. As long as we haven't created very much material, it's not hard to relicense it under another license. It will be harder perhaps a year or so down the line once we actually have some material created. But unless that's raised again, I think we'll proceed with the Creative Commons license as suggested. So with that, we can move into the meat and bones of this thing, then, to sort of discuss what are the things around SBOM management that we could look to like further specify, and emerging from the discussions that we had last year, I think that there was discussion on the format, the data format. Should we use SPDX? Should we use Cyclone DX? If we use SPDX, which version? Or should what we specify here be remain agnostic to the issue of data format, i.e. what we specify, you know, it doesn't really matter which data format you deliver in, or we don't specify that. And if we leave it to that, we probably need to discuss tooling, how we translate in a standard way between the formats. Because the vision here, as discussed last year, is really to sort of have one standard where, you know, you create a plug and play SBOM almost, where I can easily consume from upstream and then distribute that downstream if I include it in my product, and that format being accepted along the way. So the discussion on the data formats. Also, we have some discussion on sort of file format. So if we assume that we're going to have a machine readable and a human readable SBOM, what file formats do we want for those? For the machine readable, for example, would everyone be okay with fine .json files? For the human readable, we want an Excel file format. Are there open source options we should consider for file formats? Essentially, in my view, it doesn't really matter as long as sort of we all agree on one format, or if it's sort of ubiquitous enough that it's easy enough to sort of translate between them. But what are required on those? And then as for timing, of course, licensing information needs to be delivered with the software, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you need to deliver a SBOM with the software. So we want to specify the timing of when should an SBOM be delivered. Should that always be, with the delivery of the software? Happen at a later stage? Should it be voluntary to sort of separate out the SBOM and the software delivery, so that you can actually look at that SBOM without being in possession of the software, so that you can compare sort of two prospective suppliers' SBOMs and compare them to each other. I think personally, that should be voluntary, but anyhow, the timing, which will be good to have that specified, so that it's always understood that that's going to remain like a constant in all of this. What's also brought up, I don't think I mentioned during the meetings, but in emails to me at least, was if this should look to if there's a value of having template contract clauses to reference the standard for SBOMs. It not be more advanced than everyone. This is the language we're going to use to refer to this. Just sort of save time and for everyone's drafting and when everyone the agreement, so it's well understood what we mean by that. And if there's any additions to these things now, probably not going to get to this list now. If there are any additions, let's hear it. I still think there are plenty of other topics that were on the list that's we hopefully can address as we move along. But this seems to be like the most commonly viewed and the most urgent to address. So does anyone at this point add any topics, or should we get started on the discussion on data format? If this group has any preference of sort of the options available, or if we see other options that have emerged since discussed this last.
The direction
the floor
sounds
is
good
open
to me.
if anyone wants to chime in.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say the direction sounds good to me. It sounds sensible, but of course I'm not a telco. However, I did notice that joining us, we have also Osaki-san from Fujitsu. So our little group has expanded a bit, and it may be good, Osaki-san, if you have catch up to do, we'll make a recording available.
Okay, yeah. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, okay. Because just now I'm just now adjusting my video and internet output. That so sorry for just only voice and yeah. After seeing the agenda that Jimmy showed, one thing I just want to add is just the involvement, because previously I just commented that the participants will be not the vendors, but also the operators. And the real information that has a value is between the transaction between the vendors and operators. And so if you want to make this SBOM format more variable, you have to just adjust the membership, just asking like an Orange or just AT&T or some people who have an authority to ask vendors about the requirements. Sometimes it's just under NDA, but such kind of involvement will make this work groups output more variable and also plausible, I think. Just a comment, but it's just a starting point, and so it's good timing to think about it.
Jimmy, you are muted.
Thank you, Saki-san. That's most welcome comment, I must say. And I fully agree with you on the value of bringing the CSP side in, the service providers in, and having to do that early. I think that now that we have a regular cadence for these meetings, it will allow us to push it in various channels to have them join us in this effort and set these requirements, because to some degree the companies that are represented here, individuals, we're sort of the middlemen. We're not sort of in the end of either supply chain here. So we're in a good position to bring together all the ends of the supply chain and agree on requirements. I think that's what we have put up here as requirements now, or the things to discuss now. I think and I hope that to some degree reflects our common experiences with the service providers. These are sort of things that are variables in the various contracts that we have. So at least that would be my experience, and that's not going what's under NDA or what's in any specific agreement with any specific service provider. But these are sort of common variables, at least that I have encountered, and I think others have encountered as well. But for the next meeting, it's definitely on sort of the to-do list for us to get a better involvement from the CSP side. Of course, as we get further momentum behind this group, I think that will be easier as well. And I'm hoping that for our next meeting we'll have better cadence from that side. I see that Yari is raising his hand as well, so I'd like to let Yari in. Sorry.
Yes, thanks, Osaki-san, because that kind of brought to my mind that we should not just look what happens downstream, but also like upstream, that should we have some Qualcomm, Intel, who knows what, who are the upstream providers as well, to be participant of these calls, because obviously they do have their say there as well, that they prefer this or that format for whatever reason. I don't know what it could be, but I think they must have their say as well.
Absolutely, and to the topic of Qualcomm, I know that they have accepted the meeting this afternoon, so at least Qualcomm will be involved. But it's no man is an island, so we sort of need this as an effort and get alignment from sort of one end of the supply chain to the other end of the supply chain.
Yeah.
And our role here is, I see my role more as an aggregator of the different requirements and ensuring that we come up with something that is workable and implementable for everyone. If sort of one link in this chain breaks, it's not going to be be good. So it needs to be something that works for everyone. Thus, we need a broad involvement from all the different important stakeholders to set these requirements. Hopefully, most of this will be relatively uncontroversial. It's one of those standardization efforts, perhaps more like standardizing this A4 sheet of paper or a letter size paper. It doesn't really matter which size it has, as long as sort of everyone agrees that the size of an A4 paper is exactly this, because then we can tailor processes, we can tailor machining and things like that. So that's the thing here, that perhaps it doesn't have to be any technically heavy lifting. It's more that by agreeing on these things, we make things simpler for everyone. So with that, again, moving on to the meat, as said, again on data format. I think that's perhaps maybe one of the harder things to align on, or maybe one of the easier things to align on. I'm not sure, but I'm open to sort of what's the views of this group on what data format is preferred. Is it SPDX? If it's SPDX, which version of SPDX? Is it Cyclone DX? Or, another option is, of course, that will remain agnostic, but that probably entails certain other things. So does the group have any view on that? Or I mean, I could start. I and Håkan could probably start sharing our views if that would help the discussion. The floor is open.
I would vote for ISO SPDX format.
Yes, that's actually aligns fairly well with mine and Håkan's view here, that there is a real benefit to having an ISO standard to refer to. It's sort of in the terms of supply, it's a sort of it's a universal language that it's clearly understood that we want it delivered to us in this specification. I think that's, to me, it's what makes sense. And I, for one, haven't really seen anything in the telco environment and with the US federal requirements that wouldn't be supported by the ISO standard or the ISO version of SPDX. I don't know if anyone else has different experiences of that, but that's my experience so far, at least. And I see that we now have Gregory with us as well, I understand is the colleague of Mark Etienne. Welcome, Gregory.
Yes, thank you.
We're just discussing on the merits of the various data formats that we could use for a sort of standardized SBOM in the telco environment.
Yes, there is a question in the chat from Yari. So yes, SPDX defines several formats, some more human readable, what they call the tag value format, and also you have JSON, you have Excel, you have many formats. And yes, there exists tools that can convert from one format to the other.
That's a great point. That sort of goes into the point B here, and it sounds like at least this group is sort of the consensus of this group seems to be that SPDX in its ISO format is what we prefer, and at least we're sort of here on format. So what do we want to use and what's sort of the output here? I don't know if it's easier to sort of start very concrete and proposals down on what file formats we want, or do we want to start talking requirements? What do we want these file formats to support? And to the extent needed, do we, and I'm not a tooling guy, so I don't know, but do we need to specify certain tools to be used and we have consistency? Or is that not needed? That's up for discussion, I think. But opening the floor again for the file format discussion. Anyone has any views on that in either direction?
Yes,
and my thinking about and the thinking discussed so far on standardizing file format is that it would probably help in the tooling and in sort of the internal processes of each company if they understand that they're going to get the same file format process all the time.
Yes, I've put in the chat the link to the conversion tool.
So I guess as long as one can convert from one format to the other, it doesn't really matter that much, at least. But then, of course, if you lose some of the information while converting, then you might end up having some issues. But if all the information is kept, so I don't know if there are like other views on that, but to me at least, it sounds like if you can keep all the information, this whatever JSON or whatever Excel format you have, it doesn't really matter if you can go from one to the other and then go back again.
Yeah.
One question, what we might need
so
to...
I think that's...
Yeah, go on.
Sorry, I couldn't quite hear you. If you could repeat that.
Yeah, okay. So one thing what we need to figure out, and maybe that's just my ignorance, that are there any optional attributes in SPDX? Or do we need to profile SPDX in terms of what properties do we want to see in SPDX or not? Is this a valid question at all?
I have a partial answer to that. SPDX, the ISO version, is sort of modular, and you've got the core spec and then the sections around it.
Mm-hmm.
My recommendation would be to look at, I think it's Appendix 7, SPDX Lite, and that's a minimal subset of SPDX developed by companies in Japan, which may be the most useful starting point to look at and see the real core.
That's very useful, thank you.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Osaki-san just noted that SPDX Lite was basically coming from Toyota for upstream.
Okay, and it is just, sorry, just for my clarification. So SPDX Lite is basically a set of SPDX, let's say, modules defined. So it's nothing proprietary on top of SPDX, but it's basically a profile of SPDX. Okay, cool. Thank you.
You're very welcome. It's an optional part of the SPDX spec, just an appendices to that, and I will be sure to put that in the comments in a minute.
Thank you.
Yeah, just adding the explanation about an SPDX Lite. The Toyota wanted the SPDX that are editable by Excel, Microsoft Excel. And so they just asked the Japanese group members to pick the just a column and just confine just the minimum format, and they just named the SPDX Lite. And after they just summing up the requirements, they just suggested the SPDX people to just merge it to the SPDX. And so that's the reason that, as Shane said, it's like a module, and the SPDX is just like one module of that for SPDX. but I don't know that the relationship between the ISO standardized SPDX and the SPDX Lite. Sorry for that.
Okay, but I think then it is clear that this is something what we need to do is to investigate SPDX Lite and check what SPDX modules do we see mandatory in or telco standard SBOM.
Yeah. And the SPDX Lite is just reflecting the automobile industry's request. And I personally think that the telco industry is just totally different from the auto industry, because from auto industry, they're gonna care or make the Toyota or just as a car maker is like a king, and so they just ask the suppliers everything that they need. But for the telco, it's just like a transaction between the operators and the vendors. Like related things are just more related, and sometimes it's just NDAs or just between the two organizations, and it's not totally the same as automotive. And so part of the reason that I agree with Jimmy's movement is because, yeah, the telecom is not resembles the automotive group, and so the SBOM is just a good initiative, I think.
Yes, okay. That's so. My interpretation is that you think that SPDX Lite will be not fit to our need, but I think that is okay. So, but still, I think we need to then define what SPDX modules we would like to have in the telco standard SBOM. And for example, personally, I don't see that as a requirement that what Toyota had, that we would like to edit the SBOM in Excel. I would like to have machines handling the SBOM.
Personally, I'd actually like both of them. I sort of see use cases for both, as long as they sort of reflect each other. Then if that's sort of, if we leave that to each company to be able to translate between them, or if we for each receiver to translate between them, or if we actually provide both versions, I think that's to be discussed. I think there's benefits for sort of smaller consumers of open source and software packages to be able to have a human readable version and not sort of need the tooling and machining to consume the machine readable. Perhaps I'm just wrong, but I think that it probably lowers some barriers if there's also a human readable version. So, but I think we can sort of discuss the various needs, because to me this sort of now diverges. Once we gone into the SPDX path and say that we want to use the ISO version of SPDX, now we need to figure out which modularity of SPDX do we want and do we require. That then leaves us with, do we want only to require the shipment of a machine readable software bill of material, or do we want to require that both of them? If we require only, one of them, do we standardize this is the conversion tool that are to be used to be conformant, so that we can assure that everyone gets the same results each time, and that remains interoperable. And also, once we decided, machine readable only versus machine and human readable, or only human readable, once we decide that, we probably need to look at, okay, which file formats should that be delivered in, so that's also standardized. So for example, if for the human readable version, should we specify that to be XML, XSLS, or some format, or are there open source alternatives that would work better? for one only used Microsoft Excel, Microsoft Office suite. So I don't know what would work or wouldn't well in an open office environment. So that's perhaps something to look at. But I think that then the other question is, once we decided if we want one or both of them, do we want the same modularity to apply to both of them? Or do we say that for the human readable version, it's good enough if you are compliant with SPDX, but for the machine readable, we require these and these additionally? But I think that those are probably not questions we're going to be able to solve in the next 9 minutes. But I think those are interesting questions for us to continue internally looking at. I think we would need to have another look at the SPDX standard to see sort of which modularities would fit us. And I guess others would like to do the same. And we can continue that part of the discussion next time. And that sort of will give us some further input into discussion on file formats. Does that sound like a way forward for how we progress point A and B above here?
Looks okay for me.
Sounds good, Jimmy.
Great. That leaves some homework, I think, on those points, but hopefully everyone is okay with that. That pushes us to point C here on sort of the timing. To me, this is fairly obvious. I think that the way to phrase it, the way I'm thinking of it, is that the SBOM should be delivered at latest with the software delivery, so that you always deliver them sort of as one. So, but that's just, with that said, you can deliver it earlier. I see use cases where it would be sort of beneficial and useful to be able to compare two SBOMs without necessarily having to have the software distributed to you. Perhaps you want to do that as part of your sourcing requirements, that you want to review these things beforehand. Or perhaps you'd like to just, if you're sort of looking into options, perhaps you'd like to look at that. And perhaps there are other companies who might be interested in sort of putting out their SBOM sort of as advertising almost. So that would be my suggestion, that if we specify this, that it's on a voluntary basis, you can distribute this sort of separately from the software you're distributing, but at the very sort of latest, it should be delivered with the software or immediately in connection with the software. And the background of this is that we sometimes, historically at least, have had problems getting suppliers to submit the SBOMs, in a timely fashion, and sort of then having specified that this should be delivered, with the software at the time of delivery, or immediately with the software. That probably would help, and that's a concern I've heard from others as well, that the SBOM is sometimes late, sometimes very late even, and that's just sort of other to deal with. So having a standard that should be delivered with that. Any thoughts on that? Anyone think that it's unreasonable to expect it to be delivered with the software? Should we instead say it should be delivered within a week of the delivery of the software, or some such?
I would say it
more
should be
experienced
delivered
on the receiving end of this rather than the.
I would say it should be
Sorry,
delivered.
Gregory.
It should be delivered latest together with the software, but also we should then have some kind of an attribute to link it to the exact software version. So if we enable the delivery to be separated from the software, meaning that the SBOM is delivered before the software is delivered, then we should have a way to link these two.
I think that that's an excellent point, and that's also been brought up in sort of the workshops and the subsequent emails from last year, that it would be good to sort of be able to verify that the SBOM actually matches the binary or the software delivery, so that it matches the binary / source, whatever you take delivery of. How that is to be done, it's a little more technical than I'm capable of, but we could probably work with hash sums or some format of it. I think that's going to require thing, right? Do you have a solution in mind already, or should we just put that on these are things we need to work? Because I absolutely agree on the need to be able to verify that an SBOM is connected to a binary or a source.
Well, a quick solution would be that the SBOM contains the SHA-2 hash of the software, and they should be matching. I don't know if SPDX already has some kind of a solution for
I
this.
think that if SPDX has that, that's great. I think that we should aim to reuse what we can reuse. There's no good point in us developing our own solutions unless what already exists is insufficient. So that's definitely something to look at. And this is probably my own ignorance, so I'm happy to be enlightened here. Would that also work the other way around, that we make a hash of the SBOM and include that in the software, so we make sure that they sort of match on that, if you will.
Yes, that would be a solution, because the hash is a unique, basically, fingerprint of the binary.
Exactly, but so we don't just can take that fingerprint and put that on the SBOM and say, well, it's fingerprinted with this, but there needs to be a way of verifying that as well, so that there's sort of that chain goes or that goes in both directions, I guess.
Well,
Yeah.
when you receive the binary, you can take the same hash and just compare that the hashes are the same. Isn't that
That's true. That's true. But also let's look into if SPDX already contains support for that. It seems like a logical thing that it would, and in that case we have specified that that's what's going to be used. So I think we only have 2 minutes left. I think this was an ambitious agenda anyhow, so I'm not surprised. I'm actually really happy that we're running out of time, because that means that there's a value to these meetings and that we have a lot to discuss. But I would still like to leave a minute or a minute and a half to any other business. Is there anyone who would like to raise any topics?
I just
Otherwise, the email is always open.
Yes, I just have one question. What should be done to become a platinum member of OpenChain? I suppose there is a fee or something, but I didn't find the amount or how to proceed.
Sure. I'll send you some information about that. Basically, the OpenChain project platinum membership is $20,000 US per year. It includes access to the OpenChain governing board and a formal vote on the steering committee, which covers matters related to the specification, its update, and so on. I can reach out to you with more details about that after this meeting.
Yeah, yes, if you can send me an email, that would be great. Thank you.
And
excellent.
One kind of addition,
answered that question in an excellent manner, I think.
Like Jimmy, just let's say
sorry,
2.2c, like at the moment we have just US federal requirements, like from the executive order, but who knows? There might be some EU, some China, some Japan, who knows what. So should we put there like US and other, federal or international requirements? So I don't know what EU is actually, because it's not federation.
The union.
Yeah. Because there was some discussion that EU should, have similar.
And what else may be created.
Yeah.
Hopefully, what we do here will not impact that. It would probably be impacted more by the data format we use.
Yeah.
But I agree that that's a very good point. I think India might have some specific requirements that we could look into and see if that's something we need to address. But that's a very good point. We shouldn't get hung up on the US executive order and the federal requirements just because those are the most visible. Other things may exist that we need to look into.
Yeah.
That's a very good point. With that, I think we're 1 minute over time. I'll summarize this meeting, and the meeting we'll have this afternoon. That's in the more US friendly time zone. I'll summarize the outcomes of these meetings in some minutes of meeting. I'll send that out hopefully by Friday, so that we're sort of aware of what happened in meetings, if sort of new discussions happened in the US meeting that didn't happen here, where we have alignment, where we don't have alignment, and also pointing out what's sort of next on the agenda, what's next to do for us. Anyone else wants to raise something before we move on to the final point, which is closing of the meeting?
Nothing from my side.
All right. Then
thanks, Simi, for taking notes and organizing the meetings.
The meeting is now concluded.
Thank you.
For your active participation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye bye.
And talk to you on the mailing list, and talk to you all on the next Wednesday call or next Thursday call in next time.
Take care.
See you.